At 4:44 in the morning, beneath the cold waters of the Kerch Strait where Europe meets Asia and the Black Sea links to the Sea of Azov, 1,000 kilograms of TNT detonate in a carefully strategized operation. And the target, the Crimean Bridge, Putin's bridge, the 19-kilometer monument connecting the annexed peninsula of Crimea to mainland Russia. But this wasn't just a random attack. And for Russia, this wasn't just any infrastructure. It was the lifeline of their defenses, and Ukraine just used strategy and precision to beat the stronghold of Russia's defenses. Let's go way back to 2022. The SBU, Ukraine's shadowy security service, claimed they have been planning this strike for months. They waited patiently, meticulously, and with a dangerous strategy to land a perfect attack on the Crimean Bridge. They tried before in 2022 twice by using a truck bomb that managed to damage a section, sending flames across the bridge deck in footage that went viral. Then in 2023, they launched another attack, but each time Russia patched, reinforced, and kept the artillery pumping. Now what's the fuss about this bridge? Here's the answer. The bridge cost billions. It was not an ordinary infrastructure. This is Putin's concrete monument to defiance. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, the world condemned but didn't intervene, so Putin built his bridge, 19 kilometers of steel and concrete that opened in 2018, with him driving a truck across in a photo op that screamed permanence. It became the symbol Russians rallied around, but beyond that, it was a lifeline. Every truck that crossed carries ammunition. Every train passing carried artillery shells. Every convoy delivered the machinery of war pointed at Ukrainian cities. So Crimea wasn't just occupied territory. It's a launching pad where Russian bombers take off to strike deep into Ukraine. Cut the bridge, and you strangle the supply line. You force Russia into riskier routes. That is exactly why Ukraine has been obsessed with destroying it. But Russia wasn't going to continue being lucky, because this time, Ukraine went deeper. So let's unpack this. To actually call something a warfare genius lies in the approach. We're not talking about dramatic surface explosions that make good television campaigns. Ukraine took this to a whole different level. They went underwater, targeting the pillars that held the whole engineering together. The plan was this: plant TNT beneath the waterline where cameras couldn't catch the initial blast and where repairs would be more complex to fix and require time to patch, if even possible. The footage of the attack is grainy, distant, like it was taken from the camera of witnesses. You can see the water churn, the explosion, but beneath all that was a destruction beyond repair. Here's where things get murky. Initial reports from Kiev reported with triumph that there was significant damage. Mission accomplished. The bridge that symbolized everything Ukraine had lost was finally wounded. But all of a sudden, the story shifted. Traffic resumed and vehicles moved again on the bridge as if nothing had happened. Russian officials downplayed the damage, while Ukrainian officials maintained their claims that they destroyed the bridge. At this point, the real question everyone was asking was, how bad was it really? John Hendren, reporting from Kiev, had spent enough time in war zones to recognize the patterns. He knew both sides would switch the narratives until they fit their preferred storylines. This is a key bridge, he explained. Ukraine has been repeatedly trying to strike it to stop the resupply of missiles and other weapons that Russia is using against Ukraine. The truth was probably somewhere in the middle. The underwater pillars were hit, which seemed very certain. But the extent of the damage, that would take time to reveal itself. But here's what made this strike even more significant: the timing. Just one day earlier, Ukraine had pulled off something spectacular. They struck Russian bomber bases deep inside Russian territory, leaving expensive aircraft burning on tarmacs, as their long-range drones penetrated defenses and took the bombers by surprise. Then, by Wednesday, there were peace talks in Istanbul. Ukraine showed up to those negotiations with smoke still rising from Russian military bases and TNT detonating beneath the Crimea Bridge. Ukraine's message was crystal clear. They were boldly saying, "We can hit you deep. We can hurt you where it matters. Don't underestimate what we're capable of when pushed into a corner." Now here's where things take a turn. Putin heard the message loud and clear, and he responded the only way he knew how. Hours after the bridge explosion, Russian forces unleashed hell on Sumy, a northeastern Ukrainian city that had already seen too much suffering. Tornado multi-launch rocket systems lit up the sky, as massive Soviet-era weapons spat dozens of rockets in rapid succession. These weren't just explosive warheads, they were cluster munitions. They were weapons that fragmented into hundreds of smaller bomblets, turning entire city blocks into kill zones where nowhere was safe. There were reports of 3 people dead, 20 wounded, and those numbers kept climbing as rescue workers dug through rubble and hospitals received the broken bodies. Then came the air raid sirens in Kiev. Reports flooded telegram channels about an ICBM launch, an intercontinental ballistic missile, the kind of weapon designed to carry nuclear warheads across continents. Although that might probably not be true. ICBMs are strategic weapons, not tactical battlefield tools, but the rumor alone was enough to spike heart rates across the capital. But whether missile or misinformation, Russia's retaliation intent was clear. You hit our bridge, we hit your cities, you burn our bombers, we launch bigger weapons. Escalation meets escalation in a dance that's become all too familiar. However, let's zoom out for a second and understand why this bridge is such a big deal beyond just military logistics. For Putin, the Crimean Bridge represents his greatest achievement. It's physical proof that his annexation of Crimea worked. Every car that crosses, every train that passes, every tourist that visits Crimea via that bridge validates his 2014 gamble. And destroying it would be more than a military victory for Ukraine. It would be a psychological blow to Russian morale. It would show Russians that even Putin's most prized projects aren't safe, and the narrative of Russian strength and permanence is a lie that can be shattered with enough explosives in the right place. So that was a big blow to Putin. John Hendren reported, speaking to the people in Kiev. They were cautiously optimistic about the bridge strike. After months of grinding Russian advances in the east, this felt like momentum, like Ukraine could actually hurt Russia where it mattered. But that optimism was wrapped in brutal realism. When you talk to people here, Hendren said, they don't have a lot of confidence that negotiation is going to do anything. The two sides are far too far apart. Because let's be real, how do you negotiate with someone who wants everything you have? Russia demands territorial concessions that Ukraine refuses to give, and Ukraine demands complete withdrawal, which Russia refuses to consider. So the war grinds on. Some Ukrainians expect months more of this. Some say years, and some have stopped thinking about timelines entirely. At the end of the day, what we do know is this: Ukraine proved they can reach it. They proved they can hit from underwater where Russia's defenses are weakest, and that months of planning and patience can pay off with perfectly timed strikes that serve both military and political purposes. For Putin, this is a nightmare. His signature project, the bridge that was supposed to last generations, is now a liability that requires constant protection, constant repairs, constant vigilance. Every Ukrainian drone or submarine that approaches becomes a potential disaster, as every explosion, no matter how small, chips away at the symbol he built. But for how much longer? That's the question keeping Russian engineers awake at night and giving Ukrainian military planners something to smile about. Because in this war, sometimes the biggest victories aren't about destroying targets completely. Sometimes they're about proving you can, about showing your enemy that nothing they build is safe, about turning their symbols into vulnerabilities. The Crimean Bridge still stands today, but it stands wounded, knowing the next strike is definitely coming. And that might be the most devastating blow of all.